Officer Bradley Halloway sat in the defendant's chair, leaning back with a smirk that curdled the blood of everyone watching. He thought this was a joke. He thought the badge on his chest was a shield that made him a god among men. He had broken a man's jaw during a traffic stop, planted evidence, and laughed about it with his buddies. But Bradley made one fatal calculation error. The man he left bleeding on the asphalt wasn't just a suspect. He was Special Agent Mason Thorne, a decorated FBI operative deep undercover. And today, inside this courtroom, the hunter is about to become the prey. Bradley thinks the evidence is gone. He thinks the blue wall of silence will save him. But he's about to learn that when you strike a Fed, karma doesn't just hit back. It destroys you. The air inside the Superior Court of Cook County was thick enough to choke on, smelling faintly of lemon floor wax and old, nervous sweat. It was the kind of atmosphere that usually made men tremble, their knees knocking together beneath the heavy oak tables as they awaited judgment. But Officer Bradley Halloway was not trembling. In fact, he looked bored. Bradley sat at the defense table, his uniform pressed to military precision, though today he had been advised to wear a civilian suit. He had chosen a navy blue number that cost more than most people's cars, a subtle flex of the wealth he had accumulated through off-the-book seizures over a 15-year career. He adjusted his silk tie, glancing over his shoulder at the gallery. It was packed. Half the room was filled with uniformed officers, the blue wall showing up to support one of their own. The other half was a sea of angry citizens, reporters, and the family of the victim. Bradley caught the eye of Sergeant Miller, his patrol supervisor, who gave him a subtle, reassuring nod. "Don't worry, Brad," the nod said. "We scrubbed it. You're clear." Bradley turned back, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He checked his watch. He had a tea time at the country club at 4. If his lawyer, the exorbitantly expensive Robert Sterling, did his job, he'd be out of here in time for the back 9. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice bouncing off the high, coffered ceiling. Judge Evelyn Vance swept into the room. She was a woman of steel and stone, known for her no-nonsense approach and a gavel hand that struck like thunder. She didn't look at Bradley. She didn't look at the prosecution. She arranged her robes, opened the file in front of her, and peered over her spectacles. "Be seated," she commanded. The room shuffled and settled into a heavy silence. "We are here for the matter of the People versus Bradley Halloway. The charges are aggravated assault, obstruction of justice, falsifying police reports, and violation of civil rights under color of law. Mr. Sterling, is the defense ready?" Robert Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. He was a shark in human skin, a man who had made a career out of getting corrupt officials off the hook. "We are, Your Honor, and we intend to show that Officer Halloway acted strictly within the bounds of his duty, protecting the community from a perceived lethal threat." "Ms. Kinsley?" Judge Vance turned to the prosecution. Soraya Kinsley stood. She was younger than Sterling, sharp-featured and intense, with eyes that seemed to burn with a cold, righteous fire. She was the assistant district attorney, but everyone knew the Department of Justice was watching over her shoulder on this one. "The people are ready, Your Honor." "Opening statements," Judge Vance ruled. As Kinsley walked to the center of the floor, Bradley leaned over to Sterling. "Look at her," he whispered, his voice dripping with condescension. "She looks like she's shaking. She knows she's got nothing since the body cam footage got corrupted." Sterling didn't smile. He kept his eyes on the jury. "Shut up, Brad. Just look like a hero. Let me handle the law." Kinsley stopped in front of the jury box. She didn't shout. She didn't pace. She just looked at them, one by one. On the night of November 14th, Kinsley began, her voice clear and resonant. Officer Bradley Halloway, pulled over a vehicle for a broken tail light. A simple, routine stop. A ticket. Maybe a warning. That is what it should have been. Instead, within 3 minutes of exiting his cruiser, Officer Halloway had dragged the driver out of the car, thrown him against the hood, and delivered a tactical strike, a punch that shattered the driver's jaw in 2 places. She paused, letting the violence of the image sink in. Officer Halloway claimed the driver was reaching for a weapon. He claimed the driver was resisting. He claimed he feared for his life. But we are here today to prove that Officer Halloway didn't fear for his life. He feared nothing, because he believed he was above the law. He saw a black man in a luxury car and decided to teach him a lesson about place. But the man he punched wasn't a criminal. The man he assaulted was Special Agent Mason Thorne of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd, even though most knew the basic facts. Hearing it stated so plainly made the tension spike. Bradley rolled his eyes. FBI, he thought. Fancy badge. Doesn't mean he didn't reach. My word against his. Kinsley pointed a finger at Bradley, not with anger, but with accusation. You will hear how Officer Halloway mocked the victim while he lay bleeding. You will hear how he turned off his body camera. But you will also learn that the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it. She sat down. Bradley snorted softly. Good luck with that, lady. Sterling stood up, smoothing his silver hair. He walked to the jury with a warm, grandfatherly smile. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution wants to tell you a story about a villain. It's a compelling story. But it's fiction. The reality of police work is split-second decisions. Adrenaline. Life or death. Officer Halloway saw a movement, a glint of metal. He reacted as he was trained to do to ensure he went home to his wife and 2 daughters. The fact that the driver turned out to be a federal agent is a tragedy, a misunderstanding, but it does not make Officer Halloway a criminal. It makes him a human being who made a judgment call in a dark alley. Don't let the badge of the victim blind you to the reality of the street. Sterling returned to the table. Solid, Bradley whispered. They're eating it up. But as Bradley looked across the aisle, his gaze landed on the table behind the prosecutor. There, sitting perfectly still, was Mason Thorne. Thorne's jaw was wired shut, a brutal reminder of the assault. His face was still swollen, the bruising fading to a sickly yellow-green. But his eyes were locked on Bradley. There was no fear in them. There was no anger. There was only a terrifying, predatory calm. It was the look of a man who had hunted cartels and terrorists, a man who knew exactly how the trap would snap shut. For the first time all morning, Bradley Halloway felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. The trial moved into the evidence phase, and for the first 2 days, things seemed to be going exactly as Bradley had predicted. The prosecution called the paramedics, who testified to the severity of Thorne's injuries, but Sterling tore them apart on cross-examination, forcing them to admit that combat injuries often looked worse than they were, and that a fall against the pavement could have caused the fracture. Not necessarily a punch. Then came the testimony of Sergeant Miller. This was the moment Bradley had been banking on. Miller, a large man with a neck that spilled over his collar, took the stand. He swore to tell the truth, his hand resting heavy on the Bible. Sergeant Miller, Sterling asked, you arrived on the scene shortly after the incident, correct? Yes, sir. About 4 minutes out, Miller grunted. Describe the demeanor of Officer Halloway. He was shaken, Miller lied smoothly. He was pacing. He told me the suspect, the driver, had made a sudden move toward the center console. Brad. Officer Holloway. He was hyperventilating a bit. Typical stress response to a near-death encounter. And did you search the victim's vehicle? We did. Did you find a weapon? Miller paused for effect. We found a tire iron under the passenger seat, and a large, heavy flashlight in the center console, within easy reach. The jury scribbled notes. A flashlight could be a weapon. It was plausible. Now, Sergeant, Sterling lowered his voice, regarding the body cameras, can you explain why there is no footage from Officer Holloway's perspective? Miller sighed, acting the part of the frustrated bureaucrat perfectly. Equipment failure, plain and simple. We've been having issues with that batch of cams for months. The battery port corrodes. It shorts out when there's sudden movement or impact. It's a budget issue. We've requested upgrades, but he shrugged helplessly. So, the camera malfunctioned at the exact moment of the altercation? Unfortunate timing, Miller agreed, but it happens more than you think. Bradley watched the jury. Several of them nodded sympathetically. Technology failed. Everyone knew that. The blue wall was holding. The lie was becoming the truth. But then it was Soraya Kinsley's turn. She approached Miller carrying a thick binder. She slammed it onto the podium with a thud that made Miller blink. "Sergeant Miller," she began, her voice razor-sharp. "You stated that the camera malfunctioned due to a known battery port issue. Is that correct?" "That's right." "And you logged this malfunction in your official report?" "I did." "I have the maintenance logs for District 4 here." Kinsley opened the binder. "Officer Holloway's camera, serial number 894 Bravo, was issued brand new 3 days before the incident. It was not part of the corroded batch you mentioned, which was recalled 6 months prior. Would you like to explain how a brand new camera developed corrosion in 3 days? Miller shifted in his seat. Well, maybe I was mistaken about the batch, but electronics are faulty. It happens. Interesting, Kinsley said, flipping a page. You also stated you found a tire iron and a heavy flashlight. But the initial impound report, the one filed by the towing company, not the police department, lists the vehicle contents. They list the tire iron in the trunk, under the spare tire, and the center console was empty, save for a pack of gum and a cell phone. The tow driver must have missed it, Miller snapped, his face reddening. They aren't trained investigators. So the tow driver moved the tire iron from under the passenger seat, put it in the spare tire well, and then logged it. Kinsley raised an eyebrow. That seems like a lot of work for a tow truck driver, Sergeant. Objection, Sterling jumped up. Speculation. Sustained, Judge Vance said, though her eyes narrowed at Miller. Let's move on, Kinsley continued, relentless. You said Officer Holloway was shaken, but we have the dispatch audio recording from after the incident. Would you like to hear it? Without waiting for an answer, she signaled the tech booth. The courtroom speakers crackled. Static. Holloway's voice. Dispatch 10-4. Suspect is down. Send a bus, non-emergency. Guy's leaking a bit. A laugh, a distinct, cruel chuckle. Holloway's voice. Yeah, Miller, I clocked him. He's crying about his jaw. Think I broke his fancy teeth. That's what happens when you buy a car you can't afford, right? The courtroom went dead silent. The audio quality was crisp. There was no fear in that voice. There was only adrenaline and cruelty. Bradley Holloway froze. He hadn't known that part of the radio transmission was recorded. He thought he was on a private channel to Miller. He looked at Miller, who was now sweating profusely, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. Kinsley let the silence hang for a long, uncomfortable moment. Does that sound like a man who is hyperventilating from fear, Sergeant? Or does that sound like a man bragging about a trophy? Aye, people react differently to stress, Miller stammered, his credibility crumbling with every word. "No further questions," Kinsley said, turning her back on him. As Miller stepped down, he refused to look at Bradley. The air in the room had shifted. The arrogance at the defense table had evaporated, replaced by a tense, vibrating anxiety. Bradley leaned toward Sterling. "You said they didn't have the radio logs. You said the private channel wasn't recorded." "The private channel is recorded at the main switchboard, you idiot," Sterling hissed, his face pale. "You just didn't think they'd pull the raw data." "Fix this," Bradley growled. "I'm trying," Sterling snapped. "But you better hope your testimony is better than Miller's, because right now you look like a monster." "Call me to the stand," Bradley said, adjusting his tie, trying to regain his composure. "I can sell it. I just need to look them in the eye. I'll make them believe me." Sterling looked at him doubtfully. "Be careful, Brad. Kinsley isn't playing, and that FBI agent, he hasn't blinked in 2 hours." Bradley looked over at Mason Thorne again. The agent was still watching him, and for a fleeting second, Bradley thought he saw the swollen corner of Thorne's mouth twitch upward. Not a smile of joy, a smile of anticipation. What does he know? Bradley thought. What the hell does he have? "The defense calls the defendant, Bradley Halloway, to the stand," Sterling announced. Bradley stood up. It was time to perform. He walked to the witness box, projecting every ounce of good cop energy he could muster. But as he passed the prosecution table, he heard a sound. It was a soft, metallic click. He looked down. Mason Thorne was holding a pen. He clicked it once, then twice. It felt like a countdown. Bradley Halloway settled into the witness chair, smoothing the crease of his expensive trousers. He exhaled a long, shaky breath, a calculated move designed to simulate the residual trauma of a man who had faced death. He looked at the jury, making eye contact with the older woman in the second row who had nodded at him earlier. He gave her a small, vulnerable smile. Robert Sterling approached the stand gently, treating Bradley not like a defendant, but like a survivor. "Officer Halloway," Sterling began, his voice soft, almost fatherly. "I know this is difficult. I know reliving that night is the last thing you want to do. But the jury needs to understand your state of mind. Tell us about the moment you approached the vehicle." Bradley nodded, clearing his throat. "It was dark. November nights in Chicago, they get pitch black early. The streetlights on Fifth Avenue were out, again. The vehicle, a black Mercedes, had tinted windows. Illegal tint, way past the legal limit. I couldn't see inside. That puts an officer on edge immediately. You don't know if there's a family in there or 4 guys with AR-15s. And you initiated the stop because of a tail light." "Yes," Bradley said. "But it wasn't just the light. The car was swerving slightly. I suspected impairment, maybe drunk driving. My job is to keep the road safe." "Walk us through the interaction," Sterling coaxed. I approached the driver's side. I tapped the glass. The driver, he didn't roll it down right away. He cracked it maybe an inch. I asked for license and registration. He was aggressive immediately. Aggressive how? "Verbally," Bradley lied, his voice gaining confidence. He said, "Why are you bothering me?" He was cursing. He told me I didn't know who I was messing with. His tone was threatening. Then he moved. Bradley mimed a sudden jerking motion. He twisted his body toward the center console. Fast, too fast. I yelled, "Hands! Show me your hands!" He didn't listen. He kept digging. In my training, that means one thing. He's grabbing a gun. "And what did you feel in that moment, Bradley?" Bradley paused. He looked down at his hands, then up at the jury, forcing a tear to pool in the corner of his eye. "I thought about my daughters. I thought, This is it. I'm going to die in this alley over a tail light. I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted to stop the threat. I opened the door, grabbed him, and struck him once to disorient him. It was purely defensive. Thank you, officer. No further questions. Sterling walked back to his seat, looking satisfied. The narrative was set. The hero cop versus the belligerent suspect. Judge Vance turned to the prosecution table. Ms. Kinsley, your witness. Soraya Kinsley didn't stand up immediately. She sat there, writing something on her legal pad. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, then 20. The jury shifted. Bradley frowned. Was she hesitating? Finally she stood. She didn't hold a binder this time. She walked to the center of the room, empty-handed, and stared at Bradley. Officer Holloway, she said, her voice eerily calm. You mentioned the windows were tinted. Pitch black. You couldn't see inside. That's right, Bradley said, guarding himself. If you couldn't see inside, Kinsley said, tilting her head, how did you see him twist his body toward the center console before you opened the door? Bradley blinked. I could see the silhouette, through the crack in the window. The 1-inch crack? Yes. At night? With no street lights? I had my flashlight, Bradley snapped. Ah, your flashlight. The one you held in your left hand while you opened the door with your right. Yes. But in your initial report, filed 2 hours after the incident, you stated, suspect opened the door aggressively, causing me to strike him. Today you said you opened the door. Which is it, Bradley? Bradley's jaw tightened. He hadn't read his initial report in months. It happened fast. Maybe I opened it. Maybe he popped the latch. The point is, the door opened, and he was reaching. Let's talk about that reach, Kinsley said, stepping closer. She was entering his personal space now, encroaching on the cop bubble he was used to protecting. You said he was digging for a weapon, but we established that the tire iron was in the trunk. The flashlight was in the console, but it was buried under papers. So what was he reaching for? I didn't know at the time. Bradley raised his voice. That's the point. He could have had a Glock. But he didn't, Kinsley said flatly. He had a wallet. We found it on the floorboard. Did you see a wallet, officer? I saw a movement. You saw a black man in a Mercedes, Kinsley corrected, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. And that offended you, didn't it? Objection, Sterling shouted. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Vance said. Watch it, Ms. Kinsley. Kinsley backed off, pacing the length of the jury box. You testified that Agent Thorne was verbally aggressive, that he cursed at you. He did. He was screaming. Agent Mason Thorne, Kinsley mused. A 15-year veteran of the FBI, a man who spent 4 years undercover with the Sinaloa cartel, a man trained to maintain his composure while having a gun pressed to his forehead. You want the jury to believe that this man lost his cool over a traffic ticket? Everyone has a bad day, Bradley sneered. Maybe he thought his badge made him untouchable. Or maybe... Kinsley stopped pacing and looked directly at Bradley. You are projecting. Maybe you think your badge makes you untouchable. Tell me, Officer Holloway, what is a ghost stop? Bradley froze. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a magic trick. Sterling stood up halfway. Objection. Relevance. It goes to credibility and pattern of practice, Your Honor. Kinsley shot back. I'll link it up. I'll allow it, Vance ruled. Answer the question, officer. I don't know what that term means, Bradley lied. His voice was thinner now. Really? Kinsley walked back to her table and picked up a piece of paper. Because according to text messages, recovered from your personal cell phone, not your work phone, your personal iPhone 15. You used that term 3 times the week before the assault. Specifically, you texted Sergeant Miller, "Need 2 more ghost stops to hit quota on seizures." Would you like me to read the definition of a ghost stop for the jury? Bradley gripped the armrests of the chair until his knuckles turned white. A ghost stop was a term used by corrupt units for pulling over luxury cars on fabricated grounds to seize cash or assets under civil forfeiture laws, often without filing an official arrest report if they could just take the money and run. "I was joking," Bradley croaked. "It's locker room talk." "Is breaking a man's jaw locker room talk?" Kinsley asked. "Is leaving a federal agent bleeding in the street locker room talk?" "I didn't know he was a Fed," Bradley shouted, losing his composure. "If I knew he was a Fed, do you think I would have touched him?" The courtroom went silent. Kinsley smiled. It was a cold, victorious smile. "Thank you, officer. You just admitted it. You didn't hit him because he was a threat. You hit him because you thought he was a nobody. You hit him because you thought there would be no consequences. The badge didn't matter to you until it was a federal one." She turned to the judge. "I have no further questions for this witness at this time, but I reserve the right to recall him pending the introduction of new evidence." "New evidence?" Sterling asked, looking nervous. "What new evidence? Discovery is closed." "Not when it just arrived this morning," Kinsley said, glancing back at Mason Thorne. Thorne was leaning forward, his elbows on the table. He looked at Bradley Halloway, and for the first time he spoke. His voice was raspy through the wires holding his jaw together, but it carried to the back of the room. "Checkmate," Thorne whispered. The recess was chaos. Robert Sterling dragged Bradley into a private consultation room, his face a mask of fury. "You texted Miller about ghost stops on your personal line?" Sterling hissed, slamming his briefcase onto the table. "Are you insane? You told me your phone was clean. You told me you burned it. I deleted the threads." Bradley paced the small room, sweating profusely. "I deleted everything. How did they get that?" "They're the FBI, you moron," Sterling shouted. "They don't need your phone. They went to the carrier. They went to the cloud. Kinsley played you. She got you to admit you only stopped because you thought he was a civilian. That's a civil rights violation right there. We just lost the qualified immunity defense." "Fix it." Bradley grabbed Sterling by the lapels. "I am not going to prison. Do you hear me? I am a cop. I run this city. I am not going to General Pop with the animals I put away." Sterling shoved him off. "Sit down and shut up. I need to think. She said, new evidence. That scares me more than the texts. What do they have?" "Nothing," Bradley insisted, though his hands were trembling. Miller scrubbed the dash cam. "I smashed the body cam. There's no CCTV on that corner. It's my word against his." "It better be," Sterling muttered. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to electric. Rumors were flying. The press gallery was typing furiously. The blue wall of officers on the right side of the gallery looked uneasy. Some of them had quietly left during the recess, sensing the tide turning. They didn't want to be seen supporting a sinking ship. Judge Vance banged her gavel. "Court is back in session. Ms. Kinsley, you mentioned new evidence regarding the admissibility of which we need to discuss." "Yes, Your Honor," Kinsley said. She held up a small, black hard drive. It looked innocuous, but to Bradley, it looked like a grenade. "The defense has repeatedly relied on the fact that there is no video footage of the incident due to technical malfunctions of the police equipment. However, the defense failed to account for the victim's vehicle." Sterling stood up. "Objection. We searched that car. There was no dash cam." "Not a third-party dash cam, no," Kinsley agreed. Agent Thorne was driving a 2024 Mercedes-Benz S-Class, seized from a money laundering operation and repurposed for undercover bureau use. But this wasn't a stock vehicle. The FBI's Technical Support Division, specifically the Quantico engineering team, retrofitted this vehicle with the Sentinel-V surveillance package. Bradley felt his stomach drop through the floor. Sentinel-V, Kinsley explained, turning to the jury, is an integrated 360-degree recording system hidden within the chassis of the vehicle. It uses the car's existing sensors, cameras in the grille, the side mirrors and the rear bumper, but it routes the feed to a secure, encrypted server via satellite uplink. It is designed to record interactions during cartel meets. It records even when the car is off. It records audio inside and outside the vehicle. She paused, letting the weight of the technology sink in. The local police, including Sergeant Miller, could not delete this footage because it was never on the car. It was uploaded instantly to the FBI servers in Virginia. It took us weeks to get the encryption keys declassified for this trial. We received them this morning. Sterling looked like he was about to vomit. Your Honor, this is ambush by trial. We haven't seen this footage. I have a copy for the defense right here, Kinsley said, sliding a tablet across the table. But given the gravity of the accusations, that a police officer fabricated an assault to justify brutality, I ask that we play it for the jury immediately. Judge Vance looked at Sterling. I'll give you 10 minutes to review it, Counselor. Then we play it. The 10 minutes felt like 10 years. Bradley and Sterling huddled over the tablet. As the video played, Bradley watched his life end. It wasn't just a video. It was high-definition cinema. The audio was crystal clear, picked up by high-gain microphones meant to catch whispers in a drug deal. When the court reconvened, the silence was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Play the tape, Judge Vance ordered. The large screens mounted on the courtroom walls flickered to life. Video feed, Sentinel-V, Cam LF, left front, Cam Int, interior. The screen is split. On the left, a view down the side of the car. On the right, the interior view of Mason Thorne. Thorne is driving calmly. He is humming along to a jazz track on the radio. He is not swerving. He is driving perfectly straight. Blue lights flash in the rear view. Thorne sighs, turns down the music. Thorne, to himself, great. What now? He pulls over smoothly. He puts the car in park. He rolls the window down 4 inches. Thorne, clearly. Siri, start recording. He taps his phone. Thorne places both hands on the top of the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. His fingers are spread wide. He is the picture of compliance. Bradley Halloway appears in the left side camera. He is already walking with his hand on his holster. He looks aggressive. Halloway, roll it all the way down. Thorne, good evening, officer. My window mechanism is a bit sticky, but I can hear you fine. My hands are on the wheel. How can I help you? Halloway, license and registration. Now. Thorne, it is in my breast pocket. I am going to reach for it slowly with my right hand. I am a federal agent. My credentials are with my license. The audio is pristine. Everyone in the courtroom hears Thorne identify himself. Halloway, I don't care if you're the King of England, boy. Get out of the car. Thorne, officer, I am complying. There is no need to exit the vehicle for a traffic stop. What is the probable cause? On the screen, Bradley's face twists into a sneer. Halloway, probable cause is whatever I say it is. Get your black ass out of this car before I drag you out. Gasps erupted in the gallery. The racial slur hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Bradley closed his eyes at the defense table. On the video, Thorne remains calm. Too calm. Thorne, officer, I am giving you a direct order to de-escalate. I am Special Agent Mason Thorne. You are making a mistake." Bradley rips the door open. He doesn't wait. He grabs Thorne by the lapel of his suit. "Holloway, you threatening me?" Thorne's hands never leave the steering wheel area until he is physically yanked. He does not reach for the console. He does not reach for a weapon. He is pulled out. The view switches to the exterior camera. Bradley throws Thorne against the hood. "Thorne, I am armed. Badge on left hip. Do not shoot." Holloway, "Shut up." Bradley pulls back his fist and delivers a haymaker to the side of Thorne's face. The sound of the impact, a sickening crunch of bone, echoed through the courtroom speakers. Thorne crumples to the pavement. Bradley stands over him, panting. He looks around. He reaches up and taps his chest, turning off his body camera. Holloway, captured by the car's mic. "That shut you up. Tough guy. FBI. Yeah, right. Probably stole the badge, too." The video ends. The screen went black. For 3 seconds, no one moved. Then, the courtroom exploded. "Order! Order!" Judge Vance hammered her gavel, her face flushed with anger. "One more outburst and I will clear this court." She turned her eyes to Bradley Holloway. If looks could execute, Bradley would be dead. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Do you have any explanation for the discrepancy between your client's testimony and the evidence we just viewed?" Sterling stood up slowly. He looked defeated. He looked at Bradley, then back at the judge. He started to speak, but Bradley interrupted him. "It's fake!" Bradley screamed, jumping up. "It's a deep fake! AI! They doctored it!" "Sit down, Mr. Holloway." The bailiff moved in, hand on his taser. "The FBI doctored it." Bradley was frantic now, eyes wild. "He wasn't calm. He reached. I saw him reach." Mason Thorne slowly stood up from the prosecution table. He walked to the center of the aisle, ignoring the chaos. He looked straight at Bradley. "Officer Holloway," Thorne said, his voice cutting through the noise, "there is one more thing you should know." Bradley stopped shouting, panting heavily. "What? What do you want?" "That night," Thorne said. "I wasn't just driving home. I wasn't on a random patrol." Thorne reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it and held it up. It was a warrant. "I was the lead investigator on Operation Clean Sweep. We've been investigating your unit for 6 months. Racketeering, drug distribution, and civil rights violations. I was parked on that street because I was waiting for you." Thorne smiled, a cold, hard smile. "I didn't think you'd be stupid enough to assault the man sent to arrest you," Thorne said. "But you made my case a hell of a lot easier. That stop wasn't bad luck, Bradley. It was a test, and you failed." The twist hit Bradley like a physical blow. He hadn't just assaulted a random agent. He had assaulted the man holding the file on his entire corrupt life. He had walked right into the lion's den and punched the lion in the mouth. I, Bradley stammered. "Marshals," Judge Vance barked. "Take the defendant into custody. Bail is revoked. He is a flight risk and a danger to the community." As the marshals moved in, cuffing Bradley's hands behind his back, the same hands that had held the badge of authority only moments ago, Bradley looked at the gallery. The blue wall was gone. Every single uniformed officer had left the room. He was alone. But the nightmare was only just beginning, because Bradley Holloway was about to learn that federal prison is a very different place for a cop who makes headlines. The fallout from the Sentinel V video was nuclear. The trial, which had begun as a battle of inches, turned into a rout. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, a record for a case of this magnitude. When they returned, they didn't look at the floor. They looked right at Bradley Holloway. Their eyes weren't filled with pity. They were filled with the collective anger of a city tired of being bullied. Guilty, the foreman read. On the count of aggravated assault. Guilty. On the count of obstruction of justice. Guilty. On the count of violation of civil rights. Guilty. Each guilty was a hammer blow, driving Bradley deeper into his chair. But the true horror wasn't the verdict. He had expected that the moment the video played. The horror was what happened next. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In that time, Bradley sat in a solitary holding cell, watching his world dismantle on a small television screen bolted to the wall. He watched as the dominoes fell. It wasn't just him. The Operation Clean Sweep that Agent Thorne had mentioned was tearing through the department. But the news reports revealed something that made Bradley vomit into his stainless steel toilet. Sources confirm that Sergeant Thomas Miller, Halloway's direct supervisor, has accepted a plea deal. In exchange for immunity on racketeering charges, Miller has agreed to testify regarding the systemic corruption within the unit, identifying Bradley Halloway as the ringleader of the Ghost Stop scheme. Bradley screamed at the TV. "Ringleader! I was the rookie. Miller taught me the Ghost Stop. He showed me how to cook the books." He pounded on the cell door until his knuckles bled, screaming for his lawyer. But Robert Sterling didn't come. Sterling had withdrawn from the case, citing unpaid legal fees and a conflict of interest, now that the department was suing Bradley to recoup his pension. On the day of sentencing, Bradley was dragged back into Judge Vance's courtroom. The atmosphere was different now. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical finality. The prosecution table was full. Soraya Kinsley looked tired but triumphant. Next to her sat Mason Thorne. His jaw was no longer wired, though a faint scar traced the line of his chin. He looked healthy, powerful. And in the witness box, sitting where Bradley had sat, was Sergeant Miller. Miller didn't look at Bradley. He looked at the floor, sweating, his voice low. "Bradley, Officer Halloway was aggressive," Miller told the court, reading from a prepared statement. "He was obsessed with the power. I tried to rein him in. I told him to stop targeting luxury cars, but he wouldn't listen. The assault on Agent Thorne. That was all him. I was afraid of him. That's why I covered it up. I was afraid of what he'd do to me." Bradley stood up, his chains rattling. "You liar! You coward! You took 50% of every seizure. You bought a boat with the money from the Fifth Avenue bust. Sit down, Mr. Halloway." The bailiff shoved him back down, hard. Bradley looked at Miller, his eyes wide with the shock of total betrayal. The blue wall hadn't just crumbled, it had fallen on top of him. Miller was feeding him to the wolves to save his own pension. Miller would do 18 months in a minimum security camp. Bradley was going to be buried. When it was time for the sentence, Judge Vance adjusted her glasses. She looked at Bradley with an expression of profound disappointment. "Bradley Halloway," she began, her voice echoing in the silent room. "You were given a badge, a gun, and the trust of the people. You used the badge as a hunting license. You used the gun as a tool of intimidation, and you treated the trust of the people with absolute contempt." She flipped a page in the file. "The defense asks for leniency. They cite your years of service. But your service was a lie. You didn't serve the community. You preyed upon it. You assaulted a federal agent, not out of fear, but out of arrogance. You believed that because of the color of his skin and the car he drove, he was fair game. You were wrong." Judge Vance leaned forward. "For the assault on Special Agent Thorne, I sentence you to 10 years. For the obstruction of justice, 5 years. For the civil rights violations, 10 years. Bradley did the math in his head. 25 years. He felt faint. However, Judge Vance continued, given the severity of the corruption revealed by your former supervisor and your lack of remorse, these sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently. Consecutively. That meant one after the other. You are sentenced to a total of 25 years in a federal penitentiary. You will not be eligible for parole until you have served 85% of your term. You will be stripped of your pension, and your assets will be seized to pay restitution to the victims of your ghost stops. The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. 25 years, Bradley whispered. I'll be 70. As the marshals hauled him up, Bradley looked frantically at the gallery. His wife wasn't there. She had filed for divorce 3 days ago. His friends weren't there. The only person looking at him was Mason Thorne. Bradley stopped, digging his heels in. He looked at the FBI agent. "You set me up," he hissed. "You drove that car on purpose. You knew I'd stop you." Thorne stood up slowly. He buttoned his suit jacket. He walked to the railing, just inches from Bradley. "I didn't make you stop me, Bradley," Thorne said softly. "I just gave you the opportunity to show the world who you really are. You had a choice. You could have asked for my license. You could have been a professional. But you chose to be a bully." Thorne leaned in closer. "Enjoy prison. I hear the inmates have a special welcome party for cops who plant evidence." "You can't do this," Bradley screamed as the marshals dragged him toward the side door. "I'm a cop. They'll kill me in there. I need protection. I need PC." Thorne watched him go, his expression unreadable. "Justice is blind, Bradley," he murmured. "But karma sees everything." The transport bus smelled of diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, and despair. Bradley Halloway was shackled hand and foot, chained to a metal bar running along the floor of the bus. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big, itching against his skin. He wasn't going to the local county jail. He was being transferred to USP Hazleton, a high-security federal penitentiary known as Misery Mountain. Bradley kept his head down. He knew the rules. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak. Act crazy if you have to. But it was hard to hide. The news of his trial had been national. Every inmate with a TV knew his face. They knew he was the ghost stop cop. They knew he was the one who beat up a Fed. In the hierarchy of prison hate, dirty cops were at the very bottom, lower than snitches. The bus lurched to a halt. The gates of Hazleton groaned open. "Get up! Move it, ladies!" the guards shouted, prodding them with batons. Bradley stumbled off the bus, blinking in the harsh sunlight of the prison yard. He scanned the faces of the guards, looking for a sympathetic nod, a signal that he was part of the brotherhood. He got nothing. The corrections officers, our COs, looked at him with disdain. To them he was a disgrace to the uniform. He made their jobs harder. Because of cops like Bradley, every inmate hated every badge a little more. "Inmate 39482, a tall, burly guard barked. "Halloway!" Yes, sir," Bradley stammered. "Look, I need to speak to the warden. There's been a mistake with my classification. I'm supposed to be in administrative segregation, protective custody." The guard laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "PC is full, Halloway. We got a lot of celebrities in here this month. You're going to intake, then G-Block." "G-Block?" Bradley's blood ran cold. G-Block was general population. "You can't put me in Gen Pop. I'm a police officer. I have 25 years on the force." "You were a police officer," the guard corrected him, shoving him forward. "Now you're just inmate 39482. Move." The intake process was a ritual of humiliation. Bradley was stripped naked, sprayed with delousing powder, and forced to squat and cough while 3 guards watched, bored. They took his wedding ring, which he had managed to keep hidden until now, and tossed it into a plastic bag. "That's personal property," Bradley protested. "It's contraband," the guard said, sealing the bag. "Next." He was given a thin mattress, a toothbrush, and a bar of soap that smelled like lye. Then he was marched through the bowels of the prison. The noise was deafening. Shouts, banging on bars, the constant mechanical clank of heavy doors. As he walked down the central corridor of G Block, the noise stopped. It rippled down the line. Inmates stopped playing cards. They stopped doing push-ups. They walked to the bars of their cells and watched him pass. "Hey, officer," a voice hissed from cell 204. "Remember me?" Bradley didn't look. "That's him," another voice whispered. "That's the Jawbreaker." "Fresh meat," a deep voice rumbled. "Smells like bacon." Bradley stared straight ahead, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was led to cell 312 on the upper tier. The guard unlocked the door and slid it open. "Home sweet home," the guard said. Bradley stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him with a finality that echoed in his soul. The cell was tiny, 6 feet by 8 feet, a bunk bed, a metal toilet, a small sink, and a cellmate. Sitting on the bottom bunk was a man the size of a vending machine. He was bald, tattooed from neck to wrists. A spiderweb was inked over his left elbow. He was sharpening a plastic toothbrush against the concrete wall. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The man stopped and looked up. His eyes were dark, devoid of light. Bradley swallowed hard. I'm taking the top bunk." The man didn't speak. He just stared. "I don't want any trouble," Bradley said, trying to summon his command voice, but it came out as a squeak. "I just want to do my time." The man stood up. He towered over Bradley. He leaned in close, sniffing the air. "You smell like fear," the man said. His voice was gravel. "And you smell like a cop." "I was," Bradley admitted, backing up until he hit the door. The man smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "My name is Silas. You know why I'm here, officer?" "No," Bradley whispered. "I'm here because of a tail light," Silas said. "Cop said I had a broken tail light. Found a kilo in the spare tire well. I didn't put it there. But the cop said he found it. Said he saw me put it there." Bradley trembled. It was the exact same scenario. "I got 15 years, Silas said, stepping closer. "My little girl grew up without a daddy because a cop wanted to make a quota." I didn't arrest you," Bradley pleaded. "That wasn't me." "Doesn't matter," Silas said. He reached out and poked Bradley in the chest with a finger hard as stone. "You're all the same. You wear the badge. You think you're gods. But in here, there are no gods. Only devils." Silas turned back to his bunk. "You take the top bunk. You face the wall. If I hear you breathe, we're gonna have a problem. If you snore, we have a problem. And when the lights go out, you better pray to whatever god you believe in that I'm in a good mood." Bradley scrambled up to the top bunk. The mattress was barely an inch thick. He curled into a ball, pulling the scratchy wool blanket up to his chin. Night fell. The lights dimmed to a low, red hum. The sounds of the prison changed. The shouting stopped, replaced by whispers and the occasional scream from a distant block. Bradley Halloway, the man who had strutted through the streets of Chicago like a king, lay in the dark, weeping silently. He realized then that 25 years wasn't just a number. It was an eternity. He thought about Mason Thorne. He thought about the punch. He thought about the moment of arrogance that had cost him his life. Hard karma, he thought. This is hard karma. But Bradley was about to learn that karma wasn't done with him yet, because Silas wasn't just a random inmate. And the blue wall outside had sent a message inside, a message that said, "Bradley Halloway is a loose end. Cut it." As Bradley drifted into a fitful sleep, he didn't hear Silas slip off the bottom bunk. He didn't hear the whisper of the sharpened toothbrush moving through the air. "Wakey, wakey, officer," Silas whispered. The plastic shank hovered millimeters from Bradley's right eye. "You think death is the punishment?" Silas whispered, his heavy frame blocking the dim light of the cell. "Death is easy. You took 15 years of my life. Now, I own yours." Bradley, pressed into the corner of the top bunk, wept silently. He wasn't a cop anymore. He was property. 6 months later, Bradley sat in the sterile visitation room at USP Hazleton. He looked 20 years older. His nose was crooked from a fresh break, his hair was graying, and he had developed a permanent nervous tic. Opposite him, behind the bulletproof glass, sat Special Agent Mason Thorne, looking impeccable in a charcoal suit. "You won," Bradley rasped, his voice thin. "My wife left. I cleaned toilets for a dealer just to keep my teeth. Why come here?" "Closure," Thorne replied calmly. He pressed a photograph against the glass. It showed a 10-year-old boy on a bicycle. His name was Andre. "My nephew." Thorne's eyes bored into Bradley. 12 years ago, a rookie cop tackled a boy in South Chicago because he looked suspicious. The boy hit his head on the curb and died. The department buried it. "You got a commendation?" Bradley's blood froze. He remembered. Accidental death. "I promised my sister justice," Thorne continued. "I watched you climb the ladder, turning into a monster. I waited until you felt so untouchable that you wouldn't see the trap." "The tail light," Bradley whispered. "The broken tail light." "There was no broken tail light," Thorne smiled coldly. "I cut the fuse myself, 2 blocks away. I knew you were desperate for a seizure quota. I went fishing, and you took the bait." The realization hit Bradley like a physical blow. It wasn't bad luck. It was a decade-long execution. "And your lawyer," Thorne added, delivering the final strike. "He didn't quit because you ran out of money. He quit because I gave him a choice. Flip on you or face a laundering investigation. He chose himself." Bradley stared, mouth agape. Every shield he had, the system, his lawyer, his badge, Thorne had dismantled them all before they even met in that alley. "Enjoy your time, inmate Holloway," Thorne said, hanging up the phone. "Wait, you can't leave me here," Bradley screamed, slamming his hand against the glass as Thorne walked away. "Silas will kill me. Thorne!" Thorne didn't look back. Bradley was led back to the cell block, back to the noise and the fear. He lay on his bunk, staring at the concrete ceiling, realizing he wasn't just in prison. He was in a hell designed specifically for him by the ghost of a boy he killed and the uncle who never forgot. The sun had set on Bradley Holloway, and it was never coming back up. And that is the terrifying reality of what happens when the people entrusted to protect us decide they are above the law. Bradley Holloway thought his badge was a shield that could deflect any consequence. He thought he could break bones and ruin lives without ever paying the price. But he forgot the golden rule of the universe. You can only push karma so far before it pushes back. Bradley didn't just lose his freedom, he lost his identity, his family, and his dignity, trapped in a cage with the very people he used to torment. It wasn't just a legal victory for Agent Thorne, it was a masterclass in long-term justice. What do you guys think? Did Bradley deserve the 25-year sentence, or was the trap set by Agent Thorne too cruel? I want to hear your verdict in the comments below. Let's get a debate going. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes courtroom drama and satisfying justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new story. We drop new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for watching, and remember, no one is above the law. I'll see you in the next video.